What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we're going to continue our top 24 rankings. We did the running backs and the wide receivers last week. Today, I want to do the tight ends. We will do the quarterbacks later this week as well. But like I said, we're going to be talking about the tight end position and my top 24 rankings for redraft fantasy football. And how we're going to be looking at my rankings is we're going to be comparing where I have these players in comparison to ECR. ECR is expert consensus rankings. We will be talking about some of the guys that I am higher on and maybe a guy that I'm a little bit lower on than consensus right now. So without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these tight ends. So as you guys can see, I have the tier maker pulled up on the screen right now. We'll be starting off at my tight end 1. We'll be working our way down all the way to 24. So starting in tier 1, I have 2 tight ends in this tier. We are going to be talking about specifically Travis Kelce and Sam LaPorta. And here's the thing. There's really not any real differences as to my tier 1 compared to everybody else's. The only thing is I do have Travis Kelce above Sam LaPorta, where that is different than ECR. ECR does have these guys swapped, but when it comes down to my rankings, it's just looking at last year. Travis Kelce, he was still the number 1 tight end in fantasy points per game, and it does seem like he slowed down just a tiny bit. But with that being said, Sam LaPorta, he did have a historic rookie season. There was a lot of touchdowns during his rookie season, so I do expect a little bit of touchdown regression, a little bit of the same old from Travis Kelce. And on a points per game basis, like I said, he still outproduced Sam LaPorta. So give me Travis Kelce as the tight end 1 this year. Maybe this changes moving forward, but for this year, Kelce over LaPorta, both of these guys still should be the elite top tier tight ends for your fantasy football rosters. And now looking at my tier 2, I do have a couple guys in here. Mark Andrews as my tight end 3, McBride my tight end 4, and Kincaid my tight end 5. So again, nothing crazy. I think these are the top 5 tight ends. I am targeting one of these top 5 tight ends in every single draft that I am in this year. I think this top 5 is one of the best top 5s at the tight end position we have seen in a long time. I think all of these guys have elite tight end 1 upside. Maybe not as surefire things as Sam LaPorta and Travis Kelce are in the tier 1. That's why they're in the tier below. But like I said, all of these guys are going to be elite tight end 1 options. They should have tremendous PPR upside, and they are all going to be focal points of their respective offenses. So give me one of these top 5 tight ends almost every single time. Now moving on to my tier 3, we do have 3 guys in this tier, and coming in at my tight end 6, I have Kyle Pitts. George Kittle is my tight end 7, and Evan Engram is my tight end 8. And this is still pretty similar to ECR. Now in ECR, they would have Kittle and Kyle Pitts swapped. I have Pitts over Kittle. And for the most part, when I'm looking at this tier, I'm looking at these guys as tight end 1s, but they just have a little bit more of a crowded offense, or maybe they have a little bit more hurdles to jump over than the tier above them. Like I said, these guys should still be tight end 1s. They still have high upside. They have the high floor, but there is a tier break between these guys and the guys above them. Now, when it comes to the Kyle Pitts and the George Kittle situation and why I have them switched in my rankings compared to ECR, it just comes down to what I believe in Kyle Pitts. Now, obviously, Kyle Pitts, he has been one of the most hyped tight end prospects for a long time, but you look at how Kirk Cousins has fed the tight end position over the last couple of years with TJ Hockenson in Minnesota. I think he's going to do the same thing with Kyle Pitts here, and specifically, I like to target tight ends who can be the number 2 receiving option at worst in their lineups. This is going to be the case for Kyle Pitts here in Atlanta. Obviously, Drake London, he is going to be the wide receiver 1, but outside of him, obviously, they have a good run game in Bijan Robinson, but Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney, Rondell Moore, these are kind of the guys. Kyle Pitts should clearly be the number 2 option in this receiving game. So because of that, just a little bit less competition than a guy like George Kittle, but George Kittle, he is still going to be very, very good for fantasy football. He has the ability to win you any given week. Obviously, just a little bit more competition there with Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and even a first-round rookie in Ricky Pearsall. Even though I don't think Pearsall is going to get a ton of work this year, there's still a little bit more competition for George Kittle, but he should still boom for fantasy football. He's just going to have some bust weeks as well. Now, moving on to my tier 4, I have 2 guys in this tier. This is going to be Jake Ferguson and David Njoku, and I will say for the most part, this is the last tier of tight ends where I feel comfortable with them being my weekly tight end 1. Everybody underneath this, I don't feel as confident in them being a week-to-week tight end 1 for my roster. But the reason why I have Ferguson at 9 and Njoku at 10, because this is also different than consensus. Consensus has these guys swapped. And this is mainly because I think Jake Ferguson, him being the second receiving option in this offense, obviously you still have Brandon Cooks there, but this is a team that passed the football heavily down the stretch last year. They leaned on Jake Ferguson, and then this year they lose Tony Pollard. They bring in a washed up Ezekiel Elliott. This is going to be a pass heavy offense from the jump. jump. I think Jake Ferguson should see a pretty significant workload in this receiving game. I think him and CeeDee Lamb are the only options in Dallas right now as far as receiving threats go that can be reliable. So give me a guy like Jake Ferguson. Probably has breakout potential this year, and he also has a very safe floor as well. So I will give him the slight nod over a guy like David Njoku, who did see a majority of his production come last year from Joe Flacco. It wasn't even Deshaun Watson, and this is nothing negative against David Njoku. Obviously, I think him and Ferguson are in the same tier, but when it comes to deciding between these two, give me the guy in Jake Ferguson who lost competition on his offense compared to a guy in David Njoku who has gained competition in his offense. So he had Jerry Jeudy come over from the Denver Broncos this offseason. Yes, Jerry Jeudy hasn't necessarily lived up to potential, but this is still an added piece in this receiving game. So give me Jake Ferguson over David Njoku in this tier, but both of these guys can still be tight end ones for us in 2024. But now we've made it. We've made it to the part where the rankings start to really differ from expert consensus. So we're moving into my tier 5 right here. I will tell you, I got 6 guys in this tier. So the first one is going to be Brock Bowers as tight end 11, Pat Freiermuth, tight end 12, Dallas Goedert, 13, 14, Cole Kmet, 15, Dalton Schultz, and 16, TJ Hockenson. So this is where we start to differ quite drastically from ECR. You see there's a couple guys that I've circled here on the screen. I'm higher on a guy like Pat Freiermuth, higher on a guy like Cole Kmet, and I'm lower on a guy like TJ Hockenson than the consensus. But we have really entered this kind of pick your guy territory at the tight end position. Now, just to briefly touch on a couple of the guys in this tier that I have not circled before we dive deep into the guys that I have circled, I do think Brock Bowers, he does have the upside to be elite. This is a guy that I have a hard time ranking, because if you told me at the end of the year Brock Bowers finished higher than where I currently have him, I would not be surprised at all. But at the same time, you look at the draft cost and the ADP of where Brock Bowers is going in drafts right now, and it kind of puts him in this range where I don't really want to draft him at all on any of my fantasy football rosters, because the range of outcomes is so drastic for this type of guy that you could be caught drafting an asset way above ADP, and he just doesn't live up to the ADP as a rookie in year one, where we've seen that happen with many rookie tight ends in the past. Now, I also have guys like Dallas Goedert and Dalton Schultz in this tier who are solid tight ends. They are probably going to give you higher floors than normal. They can give you those boom weeks because of the offenses that they play in. But when we talk about the crowded offenses, it doesn't get much more crowded than Philadelphia and Houston. These are two of the most crowded offenses in the entire NFL. So these guys are going to be really hard to pick to start any given week. It's not going to be easy for you to do that. So at the cost, I'm probably not going to be drafting them unless I'm getting a value well below ADP, but these guys are going to be fine for your rosters, just not guys that I think are probably going to be worth it, because you're not going to know when to play them. But getting back to the guys that I wanted to talk about, let's start it off with Pat Freiermuth, who I currently have as my tight end 12 in my rankings. You look at where he's being drafted on Underdog Fantasy. He is being drafted as the tight end 14, and last year during 2023, he averaged 6.4 fantasy points per game, which was 27th at the tight end position. Now, admittedly, I've always kind of liked Pat Freiermuth, and I've always thought highly about him ever since I kind of started scouting him for my dynasty rookie drafts way back when he was coming out of Penn State. And 2023 was obviously a forgettable season for Pat after he only posted 300 yards receiving and he scored 2 touchdowns on just 32 receptions. But I really don't think a lot of that was necessarily his own fault. He was dealing with an undisclosed injury coming into the year that forced him to miss week 1, and then he suffered a hamstring strain in week 4 that caused him to miss 5 more games, and then it just seemed to limit him for a good chunk of the season afterwards. Not to mention, this is also a team that was dealing with an offensive coordinator change from a shitty play caller in Matt Canada, and they struggled with quarterback play for the majority of the year as well. Now, it's worth remembering the 2 years prior, he was averaging 9+ fantasy points per game, and even though that necessarily doesn't seem like it is a lot, it did put him in that low-end tight end 1 conversation in both 2021 and in 2022. And I think if he sees an uptick in quarterback play with Russell Wilson under center and a few more touchdown opportunities and an Arthur Smith offense that likes to feature tight ends, I could easily see him being a tight end that breaks out and kind of outperforms his ADP this year during the 2024 season. Now, another tight end that I am higher on than consensus, even though it doesn't feel like I'm higher on this guy personally, is going to be Cole Kmet. I currently have him as my tight end 14 in my rankings, and over on Underdog Fantasy, he's being drafted as the tight end 15. Now, last year during 2023, he averaged 10.7 fantasy points per game. That was 9th best in the NFL, and Cole Kmet has been very solid for fantasy football over the last few years, and it's mostly flown under the radar. In 2023, he got to play second fiddle next to DJ Moore, and he finished the year posting 73 receptions for 719 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns, resulting in a top 10 finish in fantasy points per game and as a tight end 7 overall finish on the year. Now, that was the second year in a row that he finished as the tight end 7, but 2024 is going to be a little bit of a different ball game for Cole Kmet. There's a lot more target competition in Chicago. They've added Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze, making this wide receiver room very crowded as well. And not only did they add to the wide receiver room, they also added another decent tight end in Gerald Everett that is going to just be Cole Kmet's backup, but he could also take a tiny bit of receiving work from Cole as well. Now, I kind of referenced this, but I'm a little bit shocked to find myself higher than ECR at tight end 14 because I certainly do not feel like this is a guy that I am high on. If anything, I do feel like I am lower on Cole Kmet this year than I have been in previous years, but according to ECR, I am higher than the community. I look at Cole Kmet and I just don't see him being able to replicate the 90 plus targets that he saw in both 2021 and 2023 for the Chicago Bears, but I do still believe that this is a guy who can provide us a few tight end 1 weeks from time to time, but I think it's going to be pretty hard to determine when we should be starting Cole Kmet in our lineup league. So because of this, I will be drafting Cole Kmet with caution, but I guess at his current ECR, he may end up being a slight value in my rankings. But in my opinion, he's probably a better best ball pick than he is anything, despite the reasons that many people are choosing to fade him. Now, moving on to a guy that I am a little bit lower on than consensus, we are going to talk about TJ Hockenson, tight end for the Minnesota Vikings. I currently have him as my tight end 16 in my rankings, and over on Underdog Fantasy, he's being drafted as the tight end 16 as well. Now, looking at last year, he averaged 14.6 fantasy points per game, which was second best in the NFL. And do not mistake this tight end 16 ranking for anything more than just injury concerns with TJ Hockenson. Ever since joining the Vikings, Hockenson has been absolutely elite for fantasy football, and he's been the Vikings' second best receiving threat. He led all tight ends last year with 8.5 targets per game, and even though you can contribute some of those targets coming his way to the fact that Justin Jefferson missed some time with a hamstring injury, it does show how important TJ Hockenson is in this Vikings offense. And after seeing 125 plus targets in 2 seasons, the reasons why I'm fading TJ Hockenson in 2024 is because of the unfortunate knee injury that he suffered in week 16 last year that resulted in a torn ACL and a torn MCL. Now, because of this, there's a very good chance that TJ Hockenson doesn't even start out the year active for the Minnesota Vikings, and now you have to account for a downgrade, at least in the short term, from veteran quarterback Kirk Cousins to a likely week 1 starter in Sam Darnold. And because of all of these things combined, Hockenson is a guy that I really don't have any interest in drafting unless I'm getting a very decent ADP discount on him, and preferably on a team that punted the tight end position and is looking for some upside options later in their drafts. But with that being said, this is a very risky tight end in my opinion, and there is a very solid chance that TJ Hockenson just doesn't regain form until the end of the 2024 season, or maybe even until next year. And now moving on to my tier 6 here, this is where I have 7 tight ends. I have Noah Fant coming in as my tight end 17, Conklin as 18, Juwan Johnson as 19, Luke Musgrave as 20, Cade Otton as tight end 21, Okonkwo as 22, Hunter Henry as 23, and full disclosure, there isn't a 24. I didn't want to force a guy into this tier, so I might have lied in the title. There's 23 tight ends here. If you want another name, Isaiah Likely, Taysom Hill, they might have been considered, but they're not in this tier, so this is the end of the tier for me. And I know I mentioned tier 5 as kind of that tier where you were picking your guy. This is full on dart throw, pick your poison type of territory at the tight end position. And there's actually a pretty decent chance that you're not going to draft any of these guys on your rosters. You're more likely going to be keeping an eye on them early in the season. Maybe you pick one of these guys up, or if you are a team that punted the position and you punted it this far, you're taking some dart throws to just see what happens in week 1, and you're trying to catch that early season breakout out of one of these tight end prospects. Now, if I was going to try and project that breakout, the top 2 names that I would project would be Noah Fant and Tyler Conklin, who you guys can see I'm a little bit higher on than consensus. I'm actually quite a bit higher on than consensus right now with these guys, and I definitely don't mind using a late pick, especially in those best ball drafts where you can add one of these guys to your roster. And there's also a guy in Hunter Henry that I'm much lower on than ECR, and rather than bore you guys with the whole monologue about Hunter Henry, because quite frankly, we could care less about listening to the tight end 23 and why I have a guy like Hunter Henry as tight end 23. I'll just summarize it up by telling you guys, this is a guy who is boom bust. He's kind of been a touchdown dependent option the majority of his career, and he's on a New England Patriots offense that is likely going to be playing for a top 5 draft pick. We don't project them to be very good. They have a rookie quarterback in Drake May, a decent veteran bridge kind of quarterback in Jacoby Brissett. I just don't expect this to be a team that scores a lot of touchdowns, and for a guy who's touchdown dependent, not scoring a lot of touchdowns doesn't sound like a guy that I want on my roster, and definitely not a guy that I'm drafting. So I'm a little bit lower on Hunter Henry than consensus, but I did mention that Noah Fant and Tyler Conklin were my favorite kind of dart throw tight ends. So we will talk a little bit more in depth about them. We'll start with Noah Fant because I do have him 8 spots higher than the expert consensus right now. Currently, he is sitting as my tight end 17 in my rankings, and over on Underdog Fantasy, you were drafting him as the tight end 19. If you looked at the 2023 fantasy points per game, he averaged 4.3 points, which was 36th in the NFL, so not great from Noah Fant. But once upon a time, Noah Fant, he did give us these back-to-back tight end 1 seasons, but shortly after that, he was sent in a trade package for Russell Wilson to the Seattle Seahawks, and he hasn't really done anything great for us ever since. Now, I do think that there is room for a potential bounce back for a guy like Noah Fant this year, and it is really just due to a perfect mix of things going his way. Fant has struggled with snap shares over the last couple of seasons due to an offensive scheme that just really didn't fit his play style, and having guys like Colby Parkinson and Will Disley on the roster, who quite frankly were just better pass blockers than Noah Fant, so it did limit him into kind of this part-time role. Now, this new offense under Ryan Grubb, they did choose to re-sign Noah Fant. They brought him back. They should find new creative ways to use Fant downfield, and although this wide receiver room is going to be crowded, he will still have some upside, and there should be an increase in snap share with both Parkinson and Disley taking contracts to go elsewhere this offseason. Now, even though I don't think that Noah Fant is probably going to be a tight end 1, this is still a guy that I do think could pretty significantly outperform his current ADP, and as I mentioned, he's one of those deep dart throws that you can throw if you do decide to kind of punt the tight end position. And then the other guy that I like to throw a dart on in these best ball drafts, in my redrafts, is going to be Tyler Conklin of the New York Jets. Right now, I have him as my tight end 18 in my rankings over on Underdog Fantasy. He is being drafted as the tight end 22. And you look at last year, the 2023 fantasy points per game, 7.2. That was 21st overall in the NFL. Now, Tyler Conklin has quietly been one of the most targeted tight ends over the last few years. He's averaged 87 targets in each of his last 3 seasons. And even though this hasn't translated to much production, because as many of you know who have been excited about Garrett Wilson, they just haven't had good quarterback play in New York for some time now. The Jets have tried to add some pieces this year to the offense in Mike Williams and Malachi Corley, but Williams is coming off of an ACL tear at 30 years old, and Malachi Corley, he's kind of this raw, unproven wide receiver prospect that really is going to need a specific type of role if he's going to succeed at the NFL level. I think Tyler Conklin could quietly produce another 80-plus target season, but this time he's going to be doing it with probably much more efficiency and much more touchdown upside, especially if Aaron Rodgers comes back healthy and he helps this Jets offense kind of take a much-needed step forward. Now, with that being said, I do think that there is a real possibility that Tyler Conklin gives us multiple top 10 weeks at the tight end position here this year in 2024. And as I've mentioned, in a best ball type of format or on a roster that has punted the tight end position, this is one of those guys that I don't mind grabbing late and kind of seeing if that volume still sticks with Aaron Rodgers under center. Now, that is all I have for you guys today. As you guys can see, my top 24 tight ends. And as I mentioned in this video, I much prefer to grab one of these guys here in the top 4 tiers, really trying to grab guys in that tier 1 and tier 2 this year. And those guys in tier 6 are probably just late round dart throws or week 1 waiver wire pickups if you see some things that you like. But overall, like I said, top 24 tight ends, not everybody's favorite position, but one we talk about nonetheless. So if you did like today's video, go ahead and hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. And if you want to catch more videos from us here this year, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. That way you never miss a future upload. And last but not least, make sure you are a member of our Discord. I do have a free Discord. It is linked in the description down below. I'm in there helping you guys with best ball rosters, dynasty rosters, redraft rosters, anything fantasy football related that you need. You can get it down in that Discord. It is the best way to ask me questions. So make sure to go join it. Like I said, free to join, so no risk in doing that. And with all of that out of the way, I will see you guys on our next video. But until then, peace out.